I will just go ahead and get started. As I've said, thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. You could be doing absolutely anything on this Saturday, and that you took time out of your day to, join me in this session, which is titled "What It's Like to Be the Daughter of a Famous Comedian Who Is Now Dead." My name is Janice McCullough. I am a speaker. I'm actually a birth and labor and birth doula and a postpartum doula as well. Um, I have been published in different publications. I have appeared on uh, national television shows and radio shows. And the one thing that I cannot escape is that I am the daughter of Bernie Mac. And for those of you who may not know, I never assume that people know who he is, but my Bernie Mac, he died in 2008. But before that, he was part of the original Kings of Comedy tour. He had appearances on HBO's Def Jam. He had a sitcom titled The Bernie Mac Show that was on Fox TV. He has been in Ocean's 13. As you can see behind me, a movie Mr. 3000, movie called Guess Who with Ashton Kutcher. I believe he was number 47 on TV Guide's 50 Greatest TV Dads list. So yeah, that's it. And what a coincidence. I was just watching a series of Brain Hack videos and you get out of here. All right. Yeah, so basically I am one of those people that I am not comfortable in the spotlight. I sit in the background. But once my dad started becoming famous, it changed our life, because unlike a lot of other famous people's kids, he wasn't famous when I was born. So it was something that happened that changed all of our lives, me, his, and my mom's, and I'm an only child. And he did his best to keep me out of the spotlight, but once he died, I just got thrusted into the spotlight. All of a sudden, microphones were in my face, like, hey, tell us about this. What about this? What about this? What about that? And I've always been one of those people that I like to try to help people. And I've always loved to write. And I started writing for Medium a couple of years ago because it just turned out to be a really great place to share my life stories. And I always share with the hopes that something that I've gone through, something that I've experienced can help someone else. And I found when it came to my dad, my focus isn't, I'm more than happy to talk about, his career and who he was and answer fan questions. But I noticed with him after his death that this phenomenon started happening where people were like deifying him as if he wasn't a real person. And I know fame and celebrity can do that, but I really wanted to share one so that people were able to get a glimpse of who he was, because I think he was a phenomenal human being, like whether he was famous or not. And then two, just to show that fame and money doesn't save you from the human experience, right? He was a normal, well, for the most part, a normal dad. And he made normal dad mistakes. We had, normal father-daughter relationships. And so that's really what, if you peruse my stuff on Medium, that's really what I wanted to talk about. As far as life being his daughter, it's been an interesting journey because, like I said, he wasn't famous when I was born. My parents were 19 and 20 when I was born, and for most of my childhood, we were poor. We just didn't have a lot. When they got married, he was doing okay. He had a good job working for General Motors, and he had a little bit of insurance money from when my grandmother died. So they were doing relatively well. It was 1977. So they were doing, pretty okay. But by the time I was 5, he lost his job for General Motors. And that's when we began to struggle. And from that point on, it was a lot of him juggling, trying to make his career in comedy happen while simultaneously trying to provide for the family. So He never kept a steady job after that. He was a UPS driver. He was a professional mover. At one point, he was the manager for this popular chain restaurant called Doc's here in Chicago. He was some of everything. Like his last job was Wonder Bread delivery man. And while he was doing that, he would come home from work, eat dinner with us, shower, and then he'd go to the comedy clubs where he'd be in the comedy clubs all night. And sometimes not even just the comedy club. Sometimes he would do parties and sometimes funerals. And actually, a lot of people don't believe this when I say it, but he used to go to the L station, our train station here in Chicago, and perform on the station platform uh, to tell jokes. And it just so happened in 1990, there was this big comedy contest called the Miller Lite Comedy Showcase. And he was one of the contestants for that, and he happened to win. First place was $3,000, and I was like 11, 12. I was like, oh my God, we're rich. That's the most money I'd ever seen us have in my life. And after that, it just started, like, things started snowballing. Because the thing about his career, it was not this one big moment that happened that was like, aha, this is what made him famous. It was all of these little moments, like stair step moments, that began to happen. So after he won the Miller Lite Comedy Showcase in 1990, he was still kind of hustling because like I said, it was only $3,000. So that didn't take us far. And HBO, I remember Russell Simmons and his executive producer, Bob Sumner, produced this television show called Def Comedy Jam. Some of you all may have heard of it. And Bob Sumner, he auditioned and he got to be on the show. And that was the first season. And, that his reception on that was pretty okay. It was mild. And then they invited him back for the second season and his second performance. And that's when he did his iconic "I ain't scared of you" performance. You ever seen it? That's when he's got the airbrush jeans and the crazy paisley. I don't know if it's paisley, whatever the shirt is, but yeah, that performance seemed to kind of solidify him in the comedy sectors and opened him up to being seen not just in Chicago. And from there, things just kind of started. Like I said, it was like snowballs. After that, he was called to audition for MTV movie Who's the Man with Dr. Dre and Ed Lover at the time he got that. And then more movie roles started coming. And then he did the Def Jam tour after Martin, got so popular from his TV show. And Martin left the tour. They needed a host for the tour. They called my dad. So he hosted the tour. And then from that, a young promoter by the name of Walter Latham said, hey, I want to put together this comedy showcase tour of all of these comedians. So he approached my dad, Cedric the Entertainer, and Steve Harvey and created the Kings of Comedy, and they started touring. And that tour took off and snowballed. And it's so interesting because at the time that the tour kicked off, all three of, they later added DL Hughley, like I think 2 years later. All three of them had a show, and my dad was the only one who didn't have a show. And I remember at the time people would be like, well, how come he doesn't have a show? And he would audition. He'd actually even done a pilot for a TV show called Pearl's Place to Play. And it was a really good pilot. It had some really famous people in it, but it didn't get picked up. And he would go on auditions, and people would, like, the casting agents would say things like, we like him, but it was either they weren't sure that he could be able to tone it down for TV because he was considered a blue comic because he cursed a lot. Like, if you're familiar with my dad, he had a mouth on him. Or they would say, we can't understand him. And it got so bad that at one point his manager was like, I think you might need to get a dialect coach. And he refused. But lo and behold, as the tour got more popular, he was able to start pitching a TV show. And that's how his TV show with Fox came about. And like I said, and during all of this time, I'm there. Like I said, it's not like any of this happened before I was born, and then I was born after this. It's like, hey, he's famous. This was happening in real time in my life. So the Def Comedy Jam performances, those were very interesting because I was in junior high at that time. And like I said, we didn't have a lot of money. So I remember I got teased and bullied a lot growing up, not just in junior high, just all through school. And I remember seventh grade specifically, I was partnered, my locker partner. She was this really popular girl, and I was kind of nerdy. And I remember I had his headshot in my locker, and people would come to our locker and they'd see him and they'd be like, oh, who is this black ugly dude in the locker? And she's the popular girl, so she'd be like, that's my locker partner's dad. She says he's a comedian or whatever, and people were like, he's not gonna make, people, the naysayers. And then eighth grade, he did Def Comedy Jam, and people's minds were blown. All of a sudden, it was, oh my God, oh, and people assumed we had all this money, and Def Jam didn't pay. So we still lived in a one-bedroom apartment on the south side of Chicago, but people were just like, their perceptions was so, I'm telling you, it was just so odd. I don't even know how to put the words to it. And for me, that was what was most difficult growing up with him as my dad. It wasn't being his daughter. It wasn't him. It was adjusting to everyone else's perception of me. And to my dad's credit, I remember once he kind of got that feeling that his career was about to take off, he pulled me to the side and he said, listen, I got to let you know, you're about to be hated. And you're about to be hated for no other reason than you're my daughter. And he said, everybody's got a ghetto story, right? There's not a person on this earth who hasn't been through something that, some type of hardship, something that has brought them to their knees. He said, mine will be respected because everybody will feel like I came from nothing and I made something of myself. Yours won't, because everybody will feel like you've had things handed to you. And at the time, you're a kid. I was like 14, 15. I heard him, but I couldn't imagine that could possibly be true. I was like, there's no way that that's how people would act towards me. And he was right. Like, it's been very interesting and at that point, I always felt like I had to defend myself. So for a very long time, I tried to hide that he was my dad. I didn't want people to know he was my dad, in part because of their perceptions. And then two, it's like two sides of different extremes. It's like they're all over here where they assume that I was this pampered princess that had everything handed to me. And I always tell people, I grew up in the wrong time. I grew up before MTV's My Super Sweet 16. So nobody cared about, famous people, relatives like that. We weren't on TV or seeing anything like that at that time. Or it's the exact opposite, where it's like they feel like I'm not doing enough, like because I'm his daughter, I should want to be famous too. And I never wanted to be famous. I was always happy being in the background. Like, my degrees are in psychology and mental health counseling. I just wanted to help people. That's all I wanted to do. And so it's been very interesting when people meet me and they find out that that's who my dad is. Suddenly, I stopped being me and I just started being Bernie Mac's daughter. And that's actually why now on social media, that's my handle on everything, because it was such a struggle for me. I can't even describe to you how big of a struggle that was for me, because immediately people would meet me and oh, you're Bernie Mac's daughter. And I could tell them my name, but they still wouldn't say my name. It was still, you're Bernie Mac's daughter. And it used to burn me up. I'd be like, my gosh, I have a name. Could you please use it? And one of the things that I realized throughout all of this is part of the reason that it burned me up so much is because I didn't really know who I was outside of that. Like, outside of just being known as his daughter, there's never been a time in my life where I wasn't known as his daughter, like even before he became famous. So they may not have said, oh, that's Bernie Mac's daughter when we were, oops, sorry. I set the timer so I know when to kind of level off to open up for questions, but I'll finish this thought. But there's never been a time in my life where I wasn't known as his daughter. Like I said, in the neighborhoods before we got money, they may not have said that's Bernie Mac's daughter, but it was that's Black or that's Beanie's daughter. Like, so that's never been a problem for me. I just never felt like I had to live up to being his daughter until he became famous. And I was never quite sure what that meant. And it's gotten even stranger now after he's died because now he's not here, but he kind of is because it's like that part of when he died in 2008, he was at the height of his career. And it's like all these years later, that hasn't changed. It's like that piece, that height of his career is like permanently frozen in time, so to speak, to where I can't say that I thought it like people would completely forget about him, but that he is still talked about as much as he is because this Thursday made 15 years since he died and he's still everywhere. His show is still on movies. His movies are, still on all the streaming networks. He's everywhere. People, I get tagged in DMs so much with people doing impersonations about him. Like this week alone, because of everything that happened in Montgomery, Alabama, I've gotten so many people DMing me about using impersonations. This is what Bernie Mac would say. This is how he would say. And it's sometimes it's comforting, and then sometimes it can be overwhelming because it's almost like there's a permanent reminder that he's gone and I have to deal with that. And like I said, I'm an only child. I don't have any siblings that I can look at and go, hey, could you take the wheel right now? Could you deal with this? Because I need a break. It's just me. And when he first died, I really felt this insane amount of pressure to keep his legacy going. It took me a very long time to realize I'm his legacy. Like I'm the biggest part of his legacy. And yeah, it's just been an interesting journey. So I don't want to talk too much because, like I said, I know we only have a set amount of time. Thank you for listening to me. So I'm gonna go and look through and answer some questions right now. Max, you said, what was his age during your experiences? Okay, so like I said, he was 20. So my parents got married. They were 19 when they got married, and he turned 20 2 weeks later. And then 4 months later, I was born. So he started doing comedy almost immediately, like during that time. But what happened is in 1979, I think, he did an open mic at the time, and a then unknown Arsenio Hall went before him and just, I mean, killed it. It just did great. And he had to follow after that, and he bombed. And after he bombed, I think that like really shook his confidence. So for a good, I want to say another 5, 6 years, he really just studied. He would buy records, he would watch TV shows, he would write and had books studying, honing his craft. So I want to say when he was about 25, that's when he started like performing at, parties, trying to go to nightclubs and things like that. When he won the Miller Lite Comedy Search, if I was 11, he was like 30, 31. Def Jam, he was about 34, 35. And Kings of Comedy and the TV show. Yeah, Kings of Comedy happened when he was like 39, 40. And then the TV show came about 44, 45. So yeah. Let's see what else we have. The performance is also very important for Def Comedy Jam, as well as highlighted in their best of comedy. I forgot to mention. Thank you for mentioning that, Adrian, about the Def Comedy Jam highlight, because that sure was absolutely an iconic performance. Okay, how did you manage your father's fame while in high school? That's a good question. I'm not sure. So in high school, it really, for me, it wasn't so much about managing his fame. It was more, I was a big people pleaser back then. So I was excited. I was very excited about his fame because things were happening that he'd always talked about happening. Like I remember, I want to say like my freshman or sophomore year, he got to appear on the Arsenio Hall show. And I remember going to school, like telling everybody, oh my gosh, make sure you stay up tonight and watch the Arsenio Hall show because my dad's going to be on Arsenio Hall and you've got to see it. You just got to. And I was really excited about that. So it depended on the moment. Like as excited as I was, I also struggled with not being liked because I was his daughter. And in high school, there was no way for me to hide because as you know, Adrian, we went to Morgan Park, so we went there for 7th and 8th grade, and then transitioned over in high school. So by that point, everybody knew who my dad was. So I really tried to straddle that line between being completely excited and happy and trying to share so people could get support, but also not do it too much because I didn't like that people were like, she thinks she all that because she's Bernie Mac daughter. So it was just me trying to straddle that line. Yeah. Yeah. Um, Anybody have any more questions? Feel free to ask. Thank you, Janice, for a lovely presentation. I'm so sorry for the loss of your dad, even after all these years. Thank you. Thank you so much. I will actually for that. Like I said, it's been 15 years. And I remember when he first died, I was devastated. Like, oh, it really struck my will to live. And I remember telling people when folks would ask me, how are you? I would say, like, it's only because of my daughter that I'm still here. Like, the only thing that I think would be worse is if something happened to her. And I just remember feeling like I am never going to be okay. This will never get any better. I'll never laugh again. I'll never smile again. All I'm going to do is cry. Like it's always going to be a hole in my heart. And a friend of mine, I remember she told me, I can't tell you that it gets easier, but I will tell you that it gets more manageable. And in all these years, I have found that to be the truest thing ever because there used to be this thing that I would feel every year, sometimes like a week at leading up to August 9th, which is the day he died, where I'd have anxiety, I'd be moody, I'd be like melancholy. And it wouldn't be until I looked at the calendar that I'm like, oh, August 9th is coming. Okay, that's why. And I remember I used to dread the day and feel like, if we could just skip, like, can I just go to sleep August 8th and not wake up till August 10th? And if you told me that I would eventually get to a point where the day doesn't even matter, like sometimes you have to remind me, oh, okay, it is August 9th. Okay. And that's what it's been like the past few years. And this year was no exception. I don't feel the sadness. I don't want to say it. I don't feel the sadness because I think what happens is when it initially happens, it's such a shock to your system that it's so unknown that you're like, what? Oh my God, what is this? I've never experienced this before. How can I go on? And as the years keep going, as time keeps going, it becomes so familiar that it's a part of you that's just like, oh, okay, it's there. Like I say all the time, there's never going to be a day where I'm okay with the fact that my dad's not here. I'm never not going to miss him. I miss him every day. But it's like a familiar friend now that I'm like, oh yeah, there it is. Okay. So yeah, you said time helps, but the loss never completely goes away. Yeah, pretty much. Let's see. Do you think you'll want to do anything in the industry on your own? What's next for you? If you had asked me that question a few years ago, I told you unequivocally no. Like I said, I'm like Gina from Martin. Leave me singing in the background. I don't. I'm not comfortable in front and center. That's not my preferred space. My comfort zone is behind the scenes. But I will say, I would not mind being in the industry as a writer. Like I would not mind writing screenplays. Now, right about now, that's not really with the strike and everything. That's not sounding like a viable thing. But I wouldn't mind that. Maybe even producing too. What's next for me is I'm still writing, raising my kid. Raising my kid is priority number one. And like I said, I'm an only child and I'm a single mom. So that takes priority over everything. But People have been in my ear about starting a podcast, and it's happening so much that I think that might be my next move. Not that I think we need another podcast, but it's one of those things that I'm a firm believer when it keeps coming up, that's something you need to pay attention to. So let's see. He said, how much does the memory of your dad inspire your overall writing? It inspires a lot. And not because he's famous, but because he's my dad. Like I tell people all the time, like if he had never become famous, I'd probably still be writing just as much about him as I do now. And the reason is because for me, I feel like my dad was my greatest teacher. I learned so much from him, not just from the things he directly taught me, but just the things that I learned indirectly from watching him, not just watching him in his career, but watching him grow from a man, from a boy to a man. Like I said, he was 19 when he married my mama, and he was 50 when he died. So I got to see all of that. And so for me, my writing is a lot about things that I've learned in our relationship and just from watching him. So he inspires a lot. How are you passing on the legacy of your father to your child? That's a great question. So for me, I'm very mindful of that because my dad's mother died when he was 16, and no one really talked about her to me. Like I didn't see a picture of her until I was 16 years old, and I didn't want that for my daughter. So I always make it a point to talk about him to her. Like she's older now. She's 16. So there are some things that I can let her watch of his. The TV, when she was younger, it was just the TV show. That she knew that a lot. And there are pictures of him, as you see. I've got the movie poster. So we talk about him a lot. I show her his work and I just talk about him as a person. So I definitely make sure that she is well aware of not just who her grandfather was because of his fame, but because he was a grandfather and he loved her so much. Let's see, care to share your last pleasant memories with your dad? Oh, I'll share. Okay. Yeah, because we've got to wrap up. One of my most favorite memories of my dad is when I told him that I was pregnant. My dad was such a hard, like he wasn't a soft man. Like he's a product of his times, right? So he was one of those people, and he would tell you, I'm hard, man. I make no apologies. But the day that I found out I was pregnant, I wanted him to be the first person I told, but I had to tell the father first. So I got a bib that said, I love grandpa. And I wrote a letter, and it said, see you in November, because I was doing November. And I signed, because we had the names picked out. So I signed the baby's name and I put it in a little bag with a pacifier and I gave it to him. And I remember he looked at it and he read it, and you could see him looking like between everything he's looking at and looking at me. And then he looks at me and he goes, you knocked? And I tell him yes, and he cried. And at that point, I think I'd only seen my dad cry maybe twice in my lifetime. And he just unabashed, like, I mean, grown man weeping because he was so excited. So that's one of my most pleasant memories with my dad. So yeah, I guess I'll keep going with you all until they kick us out, if that's what you all want. Because I know we are at that time. But if you have any more questions, I'll squeeze. Listen, I'll squeeze a few more in if there's anybody else. Wow, beautiful. Thanks for sharing. No, thank you. Thank you for asking. Okay, so looks like that's it. Like I said, I'll keep going if anybody has any more questions you want to ask. And feel free to, like I said, I write and share on Medium all the time. And usually I'm writing about things that I have gone through, that I've learned, that my dad has been a catalyst for me learning. So feel free to check my page out. It's Bernie's Daughter. And yeah, well, okay, I think that's it. No more questions. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you so much. Like I said, you could have been doing absolutely anything today. So that you took time out of your day to join me here, I truly appreciate it. It has been my honor to sit and talk with you. So thank you. God bless you and have a great rest of your Saturday. Pauline said, thank you, wonderful. Thank you so much, Pauline. Thank you. I appreciate it. All right. Well, everybody.